one. I'll go by seat number for our assignments to the commission. Chris McCabe.
Present.
Brian Johnson.
Present.
Pete Coughlin.
Here.
I am here. Vivian McNeil. Rebecca Graham.
Present.
Rose Black. Here. Jim Cassifica.
Here.
Steve Young. Steve is on. I have it wrong. I'm sure he will let us know. Ryan Pelletier.
Here.
Don Musker.
Here.
Roberta Manter. And Kathy Netto. Yes. That is everyone.
Very good. Let me see. The first item of business is to adopt meeting minutes for our December 14th meeting. Vivian put together a draft. Is everyone taking a look at those? Anything that needs to be corrected? Is that to adopt the minutes? So moved. Second. All in favor? And want to do a roll call vote because we are doing a hybrid meeting with both online and phone, so we'll go ahead and roll.
Chris.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
Pete.
Yes.
I vote yes. Rebecca. Yes. Carla. Yes. Jim.
Yes.
Steve. Is absent. Ryan.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Roberta. Kathy.
All right, our minutes are adopted. Next topic on our agenda is the commission's online presence, which is an ongoing issue. And we're important, and I can just say what I've done, and it's about all I can say at this point.
Right. I feel like a broken record. We are, Jim will explain what we're waiting to hear back from OIT. We have our YouTube channel, but I'm still having a really hard time figuring out a way to optimize that so that people will actually find the channel. And I'm just without support staff to sort of get that all fired up. But one thing I can sort of spin off of that is we are maybe getting closer to hiring for the paralegal position. We did extend the offer to one person, and it didn't go anywhere because they needed to take something else based on the parameters of the position and what it could offer. So we have another offer outstanding. I hope to be able to report back that the position is filled. I did put in a notice for today's meeting on the Maine Public Community Calendar. Didn't make it on there. I'll have to check and see what that was about. And I did get, but probably not until too late, Rebecca's suggestion about getting on the legislative calendar. So we've got some options. Obviously not ideal. No,
right. We have been talking to the Office of Information Technology, dealing with someone who's a senior staffer there. But he himself is not able to actually do anything on this, but he gets kicked it upstairs. Can't get on like other state agencies and commissions have their notices on a web page. They'll direct you to a site on the legislature's website that will have all of this information, just like the Right to Know Committee. It's analogous. It's set up by the legislature for just its purpose as a standing committee. We're waiting to hear back from OIT. As soon as we get confirmation that someone upstairs does or doesn't approve, then we'll go to the legislature, just talk to the legislators who wanted this commission started in the first place, because they can be likely suspects of some funding. So that's where we're at. Less than satisfactory, and apologize for the slow pace of this past spring. So that's where we are. Comments or thoughts or questions?
I would suggest that would be one of our key recommendations coming out of the commission, so that I believe that will empower that particular committee to have a bill printed.
Roberta, you may be able to answer this better along that line. You had people come in and speak. It was 15, 20. Do you have hundreds more, or do you have 50 keys and kind of, we could resolve those 50?
Well, I have a map at home with a pin in each town that has 8,000 roads that I've identified, and I have something like 265 pins. And some of them towns have multiple problem roads. They're not all current. Some are ones from way back where I found that there was a lawsuit regarding roads in the town. Current ones, as I said, I've been getting about an average of one new complaint per week for the last year. So there's 50 current ones, and in the last couple of months, the commission has gotten going, they've been coming in fast. So there's a bunch of them.
I'll get 5 or 6 ongoing litigation or administrative matters in my office right now involving roads, paper streets, abandoned ways.
I think there's been influx from our side with them since when we started to get snow, the snowmobile started going and people started calling. Talking to Roberta about it. Yeah, it just starts and then it's a seasonal thing, but it started already.
So it is ongoing. We're aware of it, and that's, I guess, why we exist as a standing committee. As much as an idea is good after hearing from folks. Which brings us to our next topic. Good segue. We received public comment at the hearing last time. We also received written comment from members of the public. What we're supposed to do in the legislature with concepts of what the problems are and how the legislature might address that. We have 2 weeks till our next meeting and we're supposed to adopt a report, and we have a report due February 1st. We are not going to have draft legislation ready in time for that time frame. We work diligently and quickly, but that's a little much. But what we can do is give a thought, as Rebecca suggested, talk about notice, but also talk about maybe the top few issues that we've seen from the public hearing, from the public comment, and some thoughts, initial thoughts anyway, if we can reach some consensus as to how those might be addressed.
We gave our administrators a moment to get in their testimony. Did you get any?
We did get a couple of pieces of testimony, or some thoughts from Rebecca. Possible that those did not make it into the larger packet.
I haven't seen those either.
Why don't we let me look to see whether there are some things to share, but keep talking while I'm looking. I think probably makes sense.
Sure, and it might be helpful because many of us haven't seen those in the chakras, and we haven't seen them. Rebecca, as to comments that she might have wanted to forward to us.
I did, however, there are a couple of folks, I believe, who are on the Zoom who might give the actual voice to some of those comments. Yeah, I have to apologize. I think they came in like right around the 30th, and I made a subfolder, and then promptly in my organization didn't follow up and get all of that to you. Maybe I can make quick copies of that right now, but feel free to proceed if calling on people makes sense.
Would it make sense to hear from the municipal officials who submitted comments or who might be on now? In fact, we need to get that input.
Is there a way you can share with us who is online, since we can't see it from this side of the room?
Yeah,
Mark Robinson, I believe he's the manager of AS, correct? Well, there's at least one other Mark Robinson I know of.
So the list is, there's a telephone number that I can't identify, code officer without a name, Don Ettinger, Mark Robinson, Thomas, is it Mark, and Tom Wheeler.
These last two are not town officials as far as I know.
Does line wish to speak? If somebody you could let us know. Raise hand or something. Mark, would you like to speak to us? You can raise your hand and say yes. Very good.
Yeah.
Hang on a second. Sorry about that.
We had you for a moment on vocals, but
You only gave him the second.
I know, I didn't realize that mistake.
Is that better?
That was completely my fault. I apologize, sir. Go ahead.
This opportunity to speak, I do see a lot of familiar faces around the table. And I am forwarding on the recommended response to Rebecca's request from us on December 15th in preparation for today's hearing. Eventually, I assume all will receive a copy of this, so I'll just read the response. And it's in response to Rebecca's email of December 15th. With all due respect, the town of Fayette is assiduously following the current road laws and have no express desire to advocate changes to the current status. Young Road is a private road across which the public in general has a public easement. The town of Fayette has no obligation, statutory or otherwise, to maintain a private road, whether or not there is a public easement. The town of Fayette may, in its discretion, maintain private roads pursuant to 23 MRSA Section 3105-A. However, the inhabitants of Fayette have not so authorized the use of public funds or public equipment to maintain Young Road. In the event emergency services is authorized to and will plow, maintain Young Road to provide necessary emergency services. In closing, the town of Fayette is fully complying with the laws on the books. It goes without saying that should the legislature change the current laws, the town of Fayette will comply with those changes when they are required to do so. That is the response from the Fayette Board of Selectmen, and I'm conveying that to you as their representative today.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further?
I think this illustrates one of the problems that we've addressed, which is the confusion in terminology. A private road and a private way are not the same thing. Young Road is not a private road. It is a private way, which means that it's a public easement. And the town took us to court back in 1984 to prove that it was not a private road, that it is in fact a public easement.
I think Mr. Robinson started the statement from the select board by noting that Young Road is a public easement or has a public easement.
They also refer to it as a private road. And this is where I said the terminology.
Thank you, Roberta. I would agree, if I may. My earlier rendition of this letter was reviewed by Mary Dennison. And Mary, in my earlier rendition, I had way, and she corrected me that the way should be changed to road. So rather than private way, it was changed to private road. So I appreciate Mary Dennison's correction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on behalf of the municipal perspective? Code officer who's on without video.
Not seeing any raised hands.
Okay. Well, if no one else would like to speak to the commission on these issues, then we'll continue our deliberations and.
How many of them been involved?
I think there's two, and I'm just about to forward you Mr. Robinson's, and I also something from Joy Downing from West Paris, which I will send to you. Should be something from Diane. She may work on the floor below. If you remember that these all came through you, did any of them come directly to the abandoned roads email? They may have come through that way. I put it out as primary defense of that, and then it was sent to me. So the ones that were sent to me, I had forwarded. Individual from West Fork, and then individual from Level. Also the abandoned roads email? No, those ones came to me. Okay, from you. Yeah, I'm looking for anything. So waiting, it occurs to me that maybe Mary Dusty's confusion is because she knows that I'm
a member of the Maine Road Association, and she may assume that that means I live on a private road, but I don't. My daughter lives on a private road, and that's why I'm a member of that. One road is a public easement on a private road. I'll speak to Mary about that.
Who's Mary?
She was better.
Who is she? Mary's an attorney. Does a fair amount of municipal law in central Maine.
And she also works closely with the Maine Road Associations.
I just look after the deadline and they did not make it into my folder. Do you want me to print this stuff out now, or just I don't see how porting it is going to help anybody at this moment?
Yeah, printing it out now, like, how long is it?
Not long.
Okay, we need to get that would at least we can look at it while we're doing our.
Yeah, why don't you keep going, and I will print this out. It's a little, I'll print out copies. If somebody else can maybe pinch it and take some notes until I give you the heads up that I'm back in my seat, that would be great. Would somebody be willing to do that? Was that a yes, Rebecca? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, go ahead.
To open the discussion, we all heard the hearing at the minute. We also have some of the discussions or summaries of who said what. Maybe it's good to go back and take a look at what we're supposed to be doing with all this information. Our duties are these. We're supposed to consider the following: property owner liability, including personal injury, property damage, and environmental damage liability resulting from public use of an abandoned or discontinued road. Public easement detention over an abandoned or discontinued road, including the scope permitted in action related to abandoned or discontinued roads, and the statutory process for the abandoned or discontinuance of a road, including barriers to determine the legal status of the road. Those are considerations for the committee. For matters other than those described above, prioritize matters for consideration by the commission by determining which matters relating to abandoned and discontinued roads have a significant negative impact, qualitatively or quantitatively, on property owners' property that but an abandoned or discontinued road. Owners of property accessible only by traveling over an abandoned or discontinued road. Recreational use, members of the public, municipal county or state government, and the physical integrity of an abandoned or discontinued road and surrounding land. Then, with all that in mind, we develop recommendations on ways to address those matters, including recommendations to statutory changes, and we'll review legislation affecting abandoned or discontinued roads and provide information to the joint standing committees. Some bill titles have come out, but we're not in a position to be able to look at legislation for this session. What we can do, though, is talk about those matters that are within our jurisdiction that we've received comments on. So if we want to start with the duties section and talk about 1, 2, 3, and 4, property owner liability, public easement retention, statutory terminology, and statutory process, and then prioritize issues that we've heard that are outside of those topics. Does that make sense? Let's go down the list. So when we talk about property owner liability, personal injury, property damage, what if we heard that stood out in a consideration of that? Environmental damage liabilities. What are some concerns that we've heard that?
One point you hit on at the end of the last meeting, you said that two of the biggest issues seem to be people who had no access because they're in discontinued development, and people who had a public easement and had no access because the public use was destroying the public easement.
That latter one would be property owner liability, property damage, environmental damage. With regard to that, I'd say it's A1 under duties. People with a public easement who, if they try to fix the road so they can use it because that's their only way to get public use it, maybe ATVs or whatever. But if someone gets hurt, they can get sued because they did the liability. They have liability to the road. And is that a consideration, something that we think needs to be looked at, addressed somehow? We certainly heard about it from a few people.
I'm thinking, like, we have a very, our landlord liability is very strong in the state of Maine when it comes to, like, recreational vehicles, like non-dick access and all that. Like, there is no liability to the landlord unless they intentionally do something, which comes down to the fact that they put a gate or bar across there. And so, like, when I look at that a little bit, unless there's anything under...
That's part of my concern on, is there conflict within the law? Because as I understand the law, they have no liability, but they can read this and wonder.
Well, okay, that's a good point.
assumption that there's a liability, I guess. Like, that's my, like...
I would say that municipal attorneys are pretty much in agreement that when it comes to a public easement, where the town has the right but not the obligation to fix it, if the town doesn't fix it, the abutters can. They have the right to do that, but at their own legal risk. So if they're negligent, their contractor's negligent, and you or I drive down that road, even if it's for recreational purposes, we could probably sue that property owner. Now, the
Landlord liability law wouldn't protect them.
No, I know what you're referring to, and that's under Title 14, Section 159A. There's a general limitation on liability for landowners if you open your property up for recreational use. And the idea that the legislature wanted to create an incentive so that you would allow your private property to be open for active recreation. People can hunt on it, and unless it's posted, people can hike cross country. Your property generally doesn't get to the right of way.
So if it was a private road, it would come down to it would be more of a landlord liability where the easement actually creates more of a conflict with the liabilities.
Yeah, if you think of it this way, if the road is discontinued, you have a town way, the town says it's too steep a grade, we don't want to send trucks anymore, it's just used by logging companies anyway, one person lives on it, we're going to discontinue the road, but we'll retain a public easement, so we'll give Corporal McCabe minor damages because it still has a public right to get up and down. Well, Corporal McCabe then has to fix that. Well, it's just, you're not going to go up there and plow and grade the road every year. You're going to be liable, potentially, for a member of the public using that road. Or if the logging company that owns the road down, owns property down the road decides to use it, there's a potential for liability. And so, even though it could be open to recreational use, you've also got that public general use and the logging truck use and maybe the UPS driver who comes down to reach your place. So that's the concern that's been expressed by people who live on these public easements, maintain them, and don't want to bring it up. The public can benefit from it, but the town's not doing anything for the public. I am, and why should I be at risk? That's a little bit different from the landowner limitation on liability, where you open it up to people who go on your land.
Would that be something that you could look at as like, hey, if it is open to public access, you would kind of mirror that landowner liability?
What if it's not? Because what if that logging land is not open to public access? Or maybe there are 6 houses on this, and it's all residential, or it's a business, and there's no public access opportunity. It's just a public right of access and keeps the town from having to fix it.
But there is public access. The whole issue, as I see it, is if they're not blocked off, the public's using it, whether the landowners, the abutters, whoever want them to or not, they can't stop it because there's a public right of way there.
So that's it. They can't, but they wind up having to pay to maintain that road for the public.
And I think that's what Chris is saying. Why wouldn't we extend to them the same protection, landowner liability protection, for that road as we would for an actual private road that is owned by, say, one of the big landowners? They're protected. I mean, if you go deep off and across Warehouse's Road, they're protected. Why wouldn't we
talking about snowmobile trails?
Snowmobile and ATV trails.
Yeah. Do you have a right to be on the public easement?
Well, that's been the big debate. We've had officials tell us yes, and we've also had town officials tell us no, depending on the town. And that, I think, has been the big dispute, which we tried to address on the ATV side back in 2004 by saying you will get landowner permission. But it's still been somewhat debated because of that section of law, pointed out to you a couple months ago or whatever, that people interpret that as meaning there's a public right-of-way, therefore ATVs can go, whether the landowner gives permission or not.
No, I agree, and what Brian's talking about here is there's a section where if a public easement is left over after a presumed abandonment of a road, not discontinued, but abandonment, it's the public easement is limited to pedestrian and motor vehicle access as defined under the motor vehicle law, which excludes snowmobiles and ATVs.
Under the new one.
Yeah,
But it wasn't that way before, and now we still have two different standards up there.
Right. And so now you have to look at how that road public easement was created, which
aside from that, though, I think, for me anyway, I can't speak for the rest of you, but I think we would want the landowners, either way, to be covered under that label for the public's use, whether it's public on an ATV or public in a pickup or walking or whatever it is.
I mean, and do you want to limit that to where the town is not maintaining and plowing the road?
Yeah, because it's a town, a public way that's maintained by the town, they're covered under main tort claims anyway. So, like when we buy insurance to protect the landowners and the trail systems, that insurance does not apply on a public maintained road, like an access route or use of the town roads. The insurance doesn't go into play, but it does. There's private roads that the landowners are given this permission on. And honestly, this will be a question now to go back to risk management, but I thought it also applied on these types of roads. But I think this debate over the landowner liability law applying there probably will raise the issue of risk management as well.
Yeah. There is a question as to whether towns are liable in the Tort Claims Act for any work they do on a public easement because they have the right but not the obligation to maintain it.
Right.
There is a separate law where towns are required to maintain a townway. And on a townway, if there are 3 or more residents saying the town's really, they haven't done what they're supposed to be doing for 10 years, they can go to the county commissioners and petition. The commissioners may do what they've said to me and say, Mr. Cat Speaker, so we're the people's court and we're going to order the town to fix that until the court says otherwise. But at any rate, there is a way to fix it. I'm not so sure on the public easement, but the idea being if the town takes the lead and maintains the public easement, then if the abutter does some work on the road, there won't be the protection from liability. But if the town isn't doing the work and the abutter has to, then the abutter would be protected under 159A or something like it. The landowner liability protection.
Currently, they're not protected because they aren't the landowner. That's sort of disputed, I think. That's the interpretation.
They're a landowner, but the protection is for letting the public use your land, not for using a road that is a public right to use.
I hear you. So, but isn't that in dispute whether or not the public has the right to use it? Isn't that why we exist?
Well, no, if it's a public easement, the public has the right to go over it. So if there's a leftover from a discontinuance or an abandonment, generally, not always, but generally there's going to be a public easement left behind that the public can use, and the town has the right but not the obligation to maintain.
When they spent a long time, I remember specifically having to have the wording of the article at the town meeting say that we were going to retain the public easement or not.
It's better form to do that, but it after September 65, it automatically was retained unless the town said otherwise in the article. Before 65, it was the exact opposite, where you have to specify, but it still is good wanted to say that you're retaining the public easements. There's no confusion.
But when we do that, and we did, we retained the public easement. If the snowmobile club or the ATV club used that as a trail, or as a trail system, are you saying that the people, as damages and gave them the property, they all wanted it done that way, they wanted the road private? Are you saying that they would not fall under the statute that allows people access because we retained that public easement over that section of road?
Well, a little more narrow than that. The legislature made some changes to the statutory abandonment statute, so it's not discontinued, it's abandonment. The public hasn't spent money to fix that road for 30 years or more, so we're going to presume there's no town way there anymore, but there will be a public easement. That public easement has been limited by the legislature in the last session to motor vehicles, which is pedestrians. Okay, so it's even narrower. That doesn't apply to discontinuances, it applies to abandonments that have happened in the last couple of years.
And that just happened in the last session?
That last session or two, yeah. And it's also, I gave you the Reader's Digest version of discontinuance. That has become more expensive as well. There has to be notice given, and if there's no other public access, there's up to 1 year, a 1 year period given to try to work out private easement arrangements before discontinuance can actually happen. So it isn't as easy to discontinue a road.
Right? Yeah, so abandonment is now essentially discontinuance. Except for common law abandonment.
Except that the process is different, because if you just continue the road that have been maintained during the last 30 years.
But we're doing our statutory duty to consider these things, right? And it's causing problems.
I feel like I'm on a committee that there's a pit in my stomach every time you talk, because I feel like we're never going to get to, how do you possibly change it? We have to change so much of the law to make this work.
Well, it probably wouldn't be a big lift to say if people who live along a public easement aren't receiving road maintenance and plowing from the town and have to do it themselves, then they shouldn't sue the back whatever that may be. You wouldn't want them to be liable.
There would be no
landowner. The user would be liable.
The user. Who would be liable?
Well, no one would.
Using your, so that's like sledding and ATVing anyway.
Yeah, right, well, no, it should be, but again, the way I understand that now, we can't, see, the big debate, I think, that Roberta actually raised was, can we not use it with snowmobile and ATV at all, or can we use it if all the abutters say we can use it, or does the law actually say that you no longer can put ATVs and snowmobiles down it no matter what? Including one of the cases came up, there was an individual who lived on it, was using an ATV, and got in trouble because you're no longer supposed to be on it with an ATV, but they're the abutting landowner.
Yeah, I pulled down the ATV statute trying to get some clarity. That was kind of fun. 3157A entitled 12, Conservation. And so a person can't operate an ATV on the land of another without permission from the landowner or the lessee. So that's fine. Permission is presumed on designated state-approved ATV trails or areas open to ATVs by landowner policy. Landowner can limit the use of that. And then we go down, operating an ATV upon a controlled access highway. You can't operate on a controlled access highway. We're not worried about that. Those are state highways with controlled access that have been blocked off or regulated. Operating a motor vehicle on an ATV trail, fine, on a public way, except as provided in this subsection, a person may not operate an ATV on any portion of a public way maintained or used for the operation of conventional motor vehicles or on the sidewalk or any public way. There are a couple of exceptions, and one of them is that I can go on the distance necessary to cross within 5 miles. So long as you can do that safely, you don't interfere with traffic. If it's been close to winter maintenance, so let's say there's a town way, and towns can do this. It's a town way, no one lives on it, it's used for logging or whatever, and it's too great a grade or too expensive when the road's in shambles, the town closes it to winter maintenance for up to 10 years. No maintained or used for the operation of conventional motor vehicles.
That's what the Gaming Club trail, because they say, we're not maintaining it for conventional motor vehicles, therefore, you can use it as a trail.
And so then the comeback is somebody who lives on the public easement that is open to public access. Not maintained by the town, but maintained by the butters, but is open to public access. Is that maintained or used for the operation of conventional motor vehicles? And the answer is, well, by whom?
Right, that's right. Because what the towns are saying is, we're not maintaining it for those vehicles, therefore you can use them.
Right.
That's what they're telling Club. I'm been telling Club, go talk to the budding landlords, get everybody's permission, but I literally had board and chair said, you don't need to talk to any of those budding landlords, we don't care what they say, you can use it.
That could be a road that's closed to winter maintenance.
Well, it's not talking about, they're talking about because we're not maintaining it.
Yeah, you're okay on the roads for winter maintenance that are close to winter maintenance. Not an issue. You're allowed. The other one, actually, the other one that's a problem because it is a public way in the sense that there's public easement, public gets right of access, but it's not maintained by the public entity. It doesn't require that it be maintained by the public entity. Just maintained for use by standard motor vehicles, conventional motor vehicles. So if I get my car over it because I've been maintaining it as a budding landowner and it's public easement, I might argue you don't have a right to be there.
Right. Well, that's my question. How do we? That to me is. This is where I think there's conflict and confusion in the law. That I mean, we're sitting in this room, we can't even figure it out. And somehow we can make that clearer.
I also do think there is some, like, I mean, I think of the Byron Road up there in Well, but the ATV trail stops. That's a winter maintenance road. We've never allowed ATVs to ride from Goose Canyon all the way to Well, just because it's a winter maintenance road.
No, but legally they can.
Right.
Legally, I'll tell you where else you can. It's worse. We can ride the snowmobile trails all the way down through the main road that's called the Watertown Road, whatever. Legally, by law, we can run all of that. Because even the National Forest System can. Now, we don't tell them all of that, and we don't let them do it because it's a nightmare because it's a green snowmobile trail. But if somebody does it, there's no way you can actually ride a left. And they're legally able to. And so we've kind of...
I think the idea behind that law, I think the idea behind that law is for passage in the winter for people that are trying to get to their places where there is no winter maintenance. So that allows, because there's no need for ATVs to ride on those roads otherwise. And I think that's the original intent of that. But
what about snowmobiles?
Snowmobile law doesn't require you to have landlord permission.
snowmobiles you can ride anywhere as long as it's not posted or you've been told not to be there. There's no what we would consider reverse posting. So if you have not been told to be on someone's, or if you've been told to be off of someone's property, you can't ride a snowmobile there. But other than that, snowmobiles can go anywhere that they want.
Yeah, snowmobile may be operated on any portion of a public way when it's been closed for winter maintenance, which makes sense.
Right, you can't operate on a public way with a snowmobile. You can't operate on a highway.
And you know what the ATVs in that you can travel up 500 yards across.
Right.
And then if the town or MDOT authorizes it as an access route, then however long distance down that road, public road, that designated as an access route. And there are snowmobile access routes in some areas. There are quite a few ATV access routes across the state. But those are on sections of road that the town or county or MDOT is in fact maintaining for regular vehicle traffic.
Rare for snowmobiles because they just don't operate on pavement. Like,
Right.
You do have one though in Foxville that's like 6 miles long that we've authorized and they wanted their road. No, ain't road, no, we filed it, they wanted it.
There are access routes, there are snowmobile access routes within some of the built-up towns as well, where you kind of, I mean, it's not ideal. Like, even if the snowmobile don't want to be driving down pavement any longer than we need to. But to get, like, downtown Jackson, downtown Illinois, get some of those areas, they are running down through to get
generally don't pound the soil like anywhere unless you tell them not to. The other thing is that on a road that's close to winter maintenance or on public easement, if somebody lives on that and following it so that they can get to their house, they can post and notify the snowmobile clubs that because they're following a public road privately without public compensation, that they are prohibiting snowmobile use on it. And the reason for that is that it's a danger. If you got somebody following a road and somebody coming the other way on a snowmobile.
So they are legally able to, even though it's a public easement, to prohibit snowmobile?
If it's a public easement and someone is not public, they can prohibit snowmobile.
Where is that, Roberta?
It's in the same law here, it's in all those subsections. The thing that's not clear is when a road is closed to winter maintenance. Most towns will say that private individuals cannot follow it, and I know 2 cases where towns have closed the road to winter maintenance, I know 3 cases where towns have closed the road to winter maintenance on somebody lives on it, and then they tell the person you can't follow it. Well, how are they supposed to get in their house? You just prohibited them from living in their house for the winter. That's a taking of access without compensating them, and that's unconstitutional.
Presumably, if somebody is living there year-round, the town is going to close the road.
They have.
But
There's one in Livermore, and there's one in, I can't remember what the town is. I know there was another one in Jackson 2 years back.
There's been a few more in recent history where people have moved in under COVID and are now living in some of those Texas areas that previously they weren't. So I think there's even more than maybe the 3. And I know over a couple of cases they told them, just use the snowmobile to get there. And I know of a couple of cases, like with camps and whatever, people were doing that. But then all of a sudden, they're going to camp became, we live there year round. And so if they can't plow it, or if they're liable to plow it, that's an issue. I would agree that I think we should at least try to address that liability and make it the same as the liability on a regular private road. Protect the landowners or the abutters the same way, I would think.
we really we started with one issue and we wound up on another. In that thing, we're talking first about the liability of a landowner who has to fix the road because the public easement because the town won't. And we've been talking now about the operation of ATVs and snowmobiles on recreational use for public easement. How about if that's an issue. We can prioritize topics for recreational users. I think what I'm hearing is, on the first part, working with the existing limitation on landowner liability that exists to allow people to use public property for public recreation and expand that to encompass someone who's trying to maintain a public easement with their own money with the town won't. That's one set. I think that's an issue that Roberta had raised early on. I think we heard it from several other people. Is that something that you can reach consensus on that we should say is an issue that you think needs follow-up?
So I have a about landowners and putting the responsibility on landowners. And if you do that, these guys are going to lose a lot because ATVs and snowmobiles primarily go on private landowners' property. So you do have, I know I hear you talking about it, toward it, but you have to be careful because if you lose the landowner and they close their land, then whatever we have for winter is going to be even more jeopardized.
I understand. I think that goes more toward the second issue we're going to get to in just a minute. This first piece is, we have a road, it's a public easement. Capital McCabe lives on that, and the town discontinued the road but left in public easement, so of course McCabe can get back and forth to his house. The town doesn't want to spend any money though to fix the road there, so Corporal McCabe's going to have to fix it himself. We don't want him to get sued when the public uses the road just because, unless he was negligent, unless he went out there and said, I'm going to put boulders down, darn it, and good luck to them trying to get over this. I can get over it with my 4x4, but no one else can.
Which is the same case as people freeing against us because they own both sides of the road, but,
Right. So what we're trying to do is say, if he responsibly takes care of the road, maintains it and plows it, so the public can use it as well as him, he won't be liable when the public uses it if someone gets a flat tire or there's some.
I honestly think something like that would encourage people to open access. Because it loses the liability of, that's the fear that you see in a lot of people is when you talk about the plowing of the road, their fear is that they're going to get sued because the snowmobile comes around the corner.
Right. So if we guarantee they can't be sued as a landowner or a budding landowner, that shouldn't cost us anything.
I think so, but, and so basically this would be where the towns don't maintain the public easement and the private property owner does in order to use the access, then that person would be, if they do it prudently, reasonably, then they'd be free from liability. If they do something foolish, they are their contractor, then they could be liable, which is exactly what happens under the landowner liability law. If you have some, a pit out there or something that's a huge danger and you don't warn the public, you're not immune from liability for that if people want to use your recreational land.
how do you prove that? How do you prove that we did?
That you can go to court on that. That's in the law now. Yeah. And the idea is you can't that of something that's really dangerous. The public can invite the public onto your land. And that's already baked into the state law right now. We're just extending it to this.
A couple McCabe can put an obstacle up and say, well, I didn't do that. So,
Yeah, well, yeah.
he would do that.
He would.
You really gotta take that.
We had, as an example, different off the road, but we had somebody string a cable across one of our rail trails years ago. We, to this day, we don't know who did it. So that could happen, obviously. But in other cases, recent history, we had an individual do the same thing and, bragged about it, and he got a visit from the wardens and everybody else because that was malicious intent, and you can't do that.
And if somebody did it on their private property and a person was injured, there'd be no immunity.
Right. That's what we explained to this individual, that if somebody gets hurt and killed or whatever, you're the one going to jail. And that problem went away because it was very clearly malicious.
Right. No proposing we do. If we can come to some general consensus, I'll work with Vivian, but we'll put together a draft. We got a really short turnaround time. We got 2 weeks. We'll get a draft together within the next week, shoot it out to you, and give you some time to think about it, and then we can adopt that draft at the next meeting with any changes that we think appropriate.
Along those lines too, it came up a little bit with the logging and stuff like that. With say, it's my road and I'm maintaining it, and the logging company comes in to log past there. I noticed that there's no liability for the logging companies to reimburse those people that are. And I think that that's something that should kind of maybe follow along suit with that, where if they're doing work in there, they're coming out. That seemed to be a common thing that was coming out of.
Right, well, now you're creating liability. You're establishing liability. One would like to think they would just be responsible. I know, but they're not, obviously. And that's the same thing on any kind of use, right? Some of these people fix their road all up, get ready for winter. And I say their road because it's really not their road at this point, it's just public. And then hunting season, we're in there with four-wheel drive trucks or whatever else, and they get to go up and now they get to fix it again. But I don't know how you can
make someone.
As soon as you go the other way and you make somebody liable, then you get hurt and hurt all of a sudden. People get really hurt.
There's under the existing law too. One is for damage to a public easement. There's a civil pursuit path and there's a criminal pursuit path. So if it's intentional, willful, then it's criminal. And if you skidder down someone's road and they have a public easement and you damage it, then it's the same as if it were a town road, irrevocable.
And so that's already in line.
Those are,
You know, generally it's the town that would do that because it's the public access. Right, not the individual, but the public would be taken care of.
But it would be the individual that damaged the road. So like, so you.
Right, they would be left the walking company or the
Exactly.
that would have to.
No, it's the individual on the discontinued road has the ability to pursue code criminals.
So Chris could go after the lawyer
Yeah,
in that scenario.
yeah.
But you would have to, you'd have to get a lawyer and.
Well, that is a criminal path, so there is a Title 17 law that he can enforce.
If it was, but what is a lawyer calling widow on a road that damages the road is never going to be considered criminal. That's going to be a
Civil, but it would be the same as if.
It doesn't seem like any of the folks that have had those issues have taken that road.
I mean, yeah, because there's a lawyer and you're complaining about that big thing.
Is it new?
Mark, what comment would you like to make?
Thank you. It's quite all right. I just wanted to make to add to your consideration. And I know some changes were considered a couple of years ago, but my comment is in regard to the unsuspecting couple that purchased property along one of these roads. And would it be the purview of the committee to consider recommending changes to the Maine real estate transfer tax declaration form or some other way of communicating that before they sign on a dotted line and own them? So that's my suggestion.
Right now, there is a real estate disclosure form that has to be filled out to talk about whether you know whether there's access and what that access is. Unfortunately, given all the issues you hear about today, it's sometimes hard to figure out what the status of that road is. Right? And so many times it's unknown. But it's a good point. Just like if your property is in tree growth, you have to note that on the real estate transfer tax form. And if you're in shoreline zoning, that has to be noted along the way. It would be nice. I think we have the real estate disclosure now. Maybe let's work within that. But it's a good idea. People need to know and be informed purchasers when they're buying properties. They can minimize the risk of getting into one of these issues. And that's something we'll think about.
And something to consider recommending to tighten up in that process. I suspect when a young David and Roberta Manter purchased property in Fayette, prior to purchasing it, had they had such a disclosure, they may have reconsidered.
It says on the deed that the road was discontinued. When David checked with the town, they told him, we ain't got it. They said it was discontinued in 1945, which was long before 1965 when they said retaining easement. Only when it went to court, the court said that because there was a line in there that said to be retained as a private way, and here's where that confusion comes into that term. A private way is not a private road. But how was he supposed to know that? So he was told that it was closed, discontinued, private way, subject to gate and barrier. He thought, good, it's my road, I'm responsible for it, I don't have to fix it. I don't have to let anybody else in. Not true.
Therein lies the basis of my suggestion.
And the problem with that is, even that's how you know which box to check. And who should check it? Is it an attorney, a municipal official? Is it the buyer, the seller? When there's that much uncertainty, I don't think anybody wants that risk.
And as I understand it, as it stands now, the realtors are saying that it is the seller who is responsible for telling the realtor what to put in that box. And oftentimes the information the seller has is not accurate. And that's where we're running into problems with
Or it's not sufficient. So, but it's certainly a consideration that the question of who knows what and who should have the ability, duty to disclose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, if I might.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, and the logging truck is found to be responsible because he made a mess of the road. Yes, but what about this four-wheel vehicle that you're talking about that just went in there to hunt? It's a one-time thing. he's in and out, you don't even know it, who's responsible? Because the road is a mess after that, whatever, his mercy, very heavy, I don't have, so that being said, who's responsible when a private citizen comes in there, not a logging truck, because the logging truck goes very slow, we can handle that, we can catch him. But what about this four-wheel drive vehicle that messes up your road? Is there a way, unless like a Roberta goes out and takes a picture of his license plate or makes of his car, and that can always happen because it can't, but who's going to be responsible for the road when something like that happens?
Yeah, that's exactly what I asked back when they passed that law, the two laws, the one that says that the Class E crime to damage a public easement with a motor vehicle, and the one that says that the landowner can sue someone who damages their access over the public easement. And I say come in the middle of the night and they're gone, or they come in when you're not home, and they drive through and nobody sees them, but you come home and you find there's these two nuts right down the middle of the road. And they said, oh no, this will work really well, we've already got the similar thing for damaging cropland or timberland. And they assured us that this is going to work. And I said, well, we'll see. And what we're finding out is that unless you have pictures of the road before they drove through, and pictures of the road after they drove through, and pictures of the vehicle driving through and damaging it, there isn't a whole lot you can do.
So we're talking about security cameras on every public easement that's privately maintained.
Point out, we had an 18-wheel that took out a bridge. Nobody knows who did that. It was a crime. It is the exact same situation that happens on a public way. We have to catch somebody in the act of doing that.
So how do you catch him and make it stick?
Well, that's a double-edged, that's two-part.
There's prosecutors involved in that, there's police involved in that, there's investigation involved in that. It's identical to.
I find already cameras are great to catch somebody in the act, but they're not good in court.
If they were established by law enforcement, the camera put it out, there's a process in place, they're very good in court. If I put one up, and I go to court and say, this is what I did, but there's no verified from law enforcement, then they may say,
The problem is, too, is the unpredictability of it, because Roberta's road, it may happen every 10 years, but it's statewide, you're having 100 a year, and you could leave a game camera out there till it grows into the tree, and you may not catch anybody.
You shouldn't have to get to that point. I can say it kind of kiddingly, but boy, you'd think that they'd find a truck that had a top missing.
Well, there's a camera order that everybody gets?
Yeah, the one that they took down, no one reported it, there was like massive damage, they had to shut down, none of that. Wow, other than one found out, and that was the concept.
One suggestion that I've made, and maybe Rebecca or someone can comment on the legality or the effectiveness of it. What about allowing people to put up a sign that says, warning, road not maintained for public use, damaging a public easement with a motor vehicle is a Class E crime? That would at least put people on notice that if you damage this road, you may be held responsible for it. And maybe it will make people think twice, and then if we catch a few of them and actually manage to enforce that, then maybe word will get around it. Maybe it's just fine, you gotta be careful.
it's a great idea, but I also know, reading through some of this, there's an awful lot of peers of conflicts where you live on the road, and I live on the road, and we don't agree with the sign being on the road. And I saw a lot of that. Really, I find it pretty sobering that neighbors are fighting with neighbors over the use of the road. So that's part of the issue, because when you got 5 people live on this road, and one wants it gated, and 3 of them want cameras and restricted use, and the other 2 want no limits to anybody, how in the world do you manage that? I mean, that's a court case. That's all that is. And you don't get to mediation usually until there's a threat of court. But that's just, and I don't know how you fix that. I mean, I've been reading some of that going, wow.
Well, I think it's a private road. Just own road, send an assessment out, but it requires them all to come to an end. And there may be some along that road, maybe 4 out of 6 agree, and the last 2 who don't agree are the last ones in, and they just want to take their skidder over everyone else's road. Yeah, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
But can that road association actually be established on a discontinued road?
If there's a discontinued road that is a private road, there's no public easement that's remaining, yes.
What happens if you have a road association and the road becomes a public easement?
Interesting one. People don't usually, you're always been told that the town's going to come in and fix it at some point, so you'd hate to go to the trouble of starting a road association where you're trying to convince town meeting to do something. I haven't seen that happen very much.
The law says that you can have a road easement if you can tell everyone on that road who maybe doesn't want to be a member of the association, but you've got those 4 who form the association. If you say you have to pay dues to maintain that public road, you can't compel a private landowner to maintain a public road with private funds because that's unconstitutional.
A public road or a public easement?
Public easement. But a public easement is open to the public, so essentially it's a public road. You're maintaining it for public use with private funds. So this is something that
Private roads have bestowed a public easement for the purpose of winter maintenance to communities in order for
that's
maintenance.
that's kind of a different situation because it's agreed
Essentially
upon.
not. It's a
If we discontinued or remains a public easement, then how can you have a road association and force people to pay to maintain this public road?
If it was a private road to begin with,
If it was a private road to begin with,
and a road association was established, everybody's paying dues.
yeah,
5 years down the road,
out of Linden,
they become a public easement. So the town accepts a public easement so that they can provide said road association some money.
yeah, that's a little bit different because it's been agreed upon and because the town is usually only providing winter maintenance and the road association is providing summer maintenance. And most of them don't go anywhere except to those properties, so there probably isn't going to be a whole lot of public use.
And the real fights on that tend to be in recreational areas, lakes, where there are roads, seasonal residents, and I pay my tax here. I'm here in the summer. I've got my house, and you don't give me anything for the tax money I spend. Can't you at least grade the road once a year? And can't you? Not a public way. It doesn't seem to be doing it. But there are some towns that adopted the fiction of, we'll put up a sign and say the public can use it. And maybe after 30 years of doing that, then there'll be public rights.
We deal with that a lot with ATVs on private ways down by lakes, golf carts, all that stuff. Like it's private road, private way, like nothing we're touching. Like you're good to go. Like come to an agreement.
So we're asked to consider property owner liability with regard to public use of an abandoned or discontinued road, and where that really becomes stuck in the public easement situation when that's retained and people have to fix it because the town decides it doesn't want to do that, which it has every right to be able to do. Public easement retention over an abandoned or discontinued road, including the scope and permitted and actual public use. This is something that we shall consider, so we shall. So it's an instance where the public easement is not subject to a public easement to allow the public to pass over it. And the problems are that not only will the people that houses along the road be able to go up and down to access their houses, but the walker has the right, as a member of the public, to use that to access the walking roads. So you get the skidder going up there. The ATVs potentially can use it. We're not quite sure, but potentially, if they do use it, you've got all this public use. You know, that people live there, so that people want to recreate by going down the road to that. The actual public use, and that is ATV use. So that's one issue.
Well, I think it's definitely, they limited ATVs on the new ones. The old ones remain unclear.
Right.
But based on what you said today, I think it's also unclear if snowmobiles can use in some cases because they've excluded
trail for years. And the landowners have not given permission for it to be used by ATVs. So they have no problems with snowmobiles using it. And my husband finally became a member of the snowmobile club, even though we don't have a snowmobile, because if the snowmobile packs the 2-mile loop around, he can take a service dog out for a walk on the snowmobile trail all winter. It's great. So he's been helping maintain the trails, and as I said, part of it comes right straight down the discontinued road.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of discontinued roads out there. Brian can speak to it, John can speak to it, that we've been using for ATVs and snowmobiles since the 70s. And since the late 80s, in many cases with ATVs, and some of them we have been shut off with different both over time. I think in New Sharon at one point, all those discontinued roads were open to both, and now none of them are open to ATVs, and about half of them are open. So a couple of private landowners basically went after the town council on it, and they got direction from attorneys that said, you're out of line here, just carve on opening all these up, so they went the other way and closed.
And it's funny too, like you talk about Fayette and your road being like ATVs using it. Like from our perspective, there's no ATV club in the town of Fayette. There's no maintained ATV trail.
Right.
No one should be riding there unless you're a landowner. But the problem is when it comes down to that public easement and the use of an ATV on it. But from our perspective with the Warden Service, there should be no one riding there unless like Roberta's out riding on her road because there's no maintained club.
And Mercer,
Yeah.
no club.
Yeah.
No trail. Every road in town, town and Mercer open up to ATVs.
Yep.
And so then you get use occurring all over the place.
Right.
And when you then swap out the DOT, parts of the road that they're funding, and you got a town select board saying, this is what we're doing, and we played no role in that. Law enforcement didn't, we didn't, and the DOT didn't, and that's what they're doing. And the law allows them to do that. A lot of people don't want to see that change, but that's certainly, when we got the ATV access route in place, it originated in Martell, the very first one. We resolved the issue with the state potato fields by running them down 3 miles of dirt public road. And everybody was happy, and then the DA said, the local warden to say, that's really well and good, but you can't legally do this if you're exceeding your 500 yards. So they got legislation passed to allow access, and that's how it all started. But that was the intent, is to connect trails, get around things like that. That's now been taken to where you got towns that open every road in town with no trail, no club, no connection. And it's like, really? Just what we have cases, I think I mentioned earlier, where they overdo that. Get from where the trails are downtown. No, right. I mean, it's appropriate in places where you're using the trail comes in and you use up the roads in the town, like many temples, Jackson, Greenville, Caribou, Prescott, all of it. You can't go the baby with the bathwater, but the unlimited limits there is just very. We see areas where they've opened up all kinds of stuff that arguably could be considered intent of the law when we were in front of the legislature. But less local control. Yeah, I know, that's right. And that's, we all get that, right? So that's the struggle.
Is it a good idea that there is a public easement retained generally in discontinuance and abandonment?
I think it's a good idea, but having lived it for a long time now, I do feel that there should still be some obligation on the town when the decision is made to compensate for the maintenance of a road whenever it's publicly retained, like when there's a public easement retained. If the town is.
So is the current public easement, let me make sure I understand that. You can't use an ATV, but you can use a regular motor vehicle.
Yeah.
And that's where, we're not sure on the ATV.
I think that's public easement not being used for an ATV.
Yeah, right, so I agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, but it's very clear that when we retain a public easement, I can take my four-wheel drive down through there.
You can take your car out.
And that's where, you know, granted ATVs can do significant amount of damage, particularly there's a lot of them. But what we see a lot is hunting season with four-wheel drive vehicles.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. It seems like if we're going to maintain a public easement that says public can do this, why is it Roberta's responsibility to be stuck fixing 3-foot ruts at the end of every hunting season? You know, and that's getting worse every year because the freeze-thaw thing is happening. You know, we don't freeze up, bury it with snow, and let it go until spring anymore. I mean, this winter is a perfect example. So I guess if I was in that scenario, and you know, I would understand that. I mean, talk to Rick LaFleur, Chris's counterpart. He's on a road up there that the private camp owners share along with the ATV and snowmobile clubs. And the rest of the story is we funnel all of the ATV program to kind of keep the peace and everybody shares. And if we were doing some level of that statewide, I think that would resolve some of these issues. But
I think the other piece of that, to kind of go back to what I was talking about, discontinuance is a public process that involves a legislative body. And the ATV statute says the municipal officers. So there is no public process that is part of designating a ATV. And they can't even entertain one. So you can petition it as a public process as well.
you mean on an access route?
If the Title 12, that section of law, specific to state aid.
Right, but I mean, there are some,
Public process.
well, there is a lot of cases, because I know several where they plastic used to do it until it was unworn. So they
So that's really like, that's not what the law says, in order for them to designate it as the municipal officer.
Right, well,
And
again,
so, like, even if it's on a warrant,
well,
that's not the.
what's, I guess the difference is, I've seen, you know, the board say, we'll make a decision, bring it broad or otherwise, and then I've seen them say, we're not going to make a decision until we hear from the public on it, either in a public meeting, at the regular town meeting, because they put it on a warrant and let the town vote. They still make the decision afterwards. I was at a meeting where the vote went one way and the board went the other way and said the vote doesn't mean anything by law.
And that's all the problem.
Yeah, well, and I was back at the meeting because it wasn't friendly.
And I think MMA's done what that would be, don't do the public process.
Because
You're not covered for doing that, and you're going to make people less people. Because you're moving in that direction because of the way that's written the municipal office.
But back to what you said at the beginning,
The public
that
process.
discontinuance does require the public legislative body, which is the town meeting. Unless you're in a town that has city or town council that has given that legislative authority to the council.
One of the problems with that, though, Ryan, is that when you discontinue a road by vote of the townspeople, if there's nothing mentioned in the article about retaining a public easement,
Right.
you automatically get one. And the people who are voting on it may not know that.
Right, but what I'm saying is if that happens and a public easement is retained, there should still continue, there should be some financial contribution.
right, I mean, I think that would resolve some of this, right?
But who's going to make that contribution?
The town will have to continue, the town will have to fund it like they fund any of their other road maintenance issues, but how you know, so when we have to come up with our three things on here, is there shouldn't be any automatic anything. It shouldn't be automatic public easement, or it shouldn't be automatically private. I kind of laid out a process in here, leave it up to the abutters, which may be a problem, but leave it up to the people that live on the road to make the decision. And then they make a recommendation, there's a public hearing with the board, and the board tells them here's the process, and then ultimately it leads to a town meeting vote, and the towns that go along with what the abutters get, the abutters may say we want public easement, or they might say we want private. Okay, that recommendation goes to the warrant article, and then the town people vote on it. Or if they vote for it, that might lead to public money that might be needed. And that's where, Roberta, you had mentioned the minimum maintenance in here about what minimum maintenance would be, depending on how that's budgeted and how many balance you have. If you're going to allot up to a certain dollar amount, it might be $8,000. And then maybe let the people that on the road decide who's going to do the work, but ultimately the town might pay them up to that $1,000, whatever the math comes out to be. But the bottom line was, don't have anything be automatic. Leave it up to the people to decide, and then have it ultimately be town meeting vote. And everyone should have agreed along the way what it ought to be. Because I think the automatic, whether it's what happened pre-65 or post-65, when you have something happen automatically, that's gonna irritate half the people. Right, all the time. Well, so leave it up to the people to decide, which may be a difficult thing to oppose, but leave it to the people to decide.
Is that not what's happening now? Not that discontinued is happening on a regular basis, but that's what the statute is meant. The statute is that there's a public process, there's a doubt, there is whether or not it's going to be retained or not. And towns can do minimum maintenance already, but the legislative body has to appropriate that money. So there already is that ability.
Well, I think there are two things with that. One is that towns may decide not to do even minimum maintenance on a public easement, and then people have to fend for themselves.
Right.
But I think that the bigger issue, I think I'm going to disagree with you on this, respectfully. Or as attorney saying, with all due respect. I think the reason the automatic retention of the public easement back in 1965 is an important one. No one wants to landlock our system. Many of us live on roads where it's always been a town road. And there's no private right of any access to our house in our deeds. Because we're on a public road, and public road may have been there for 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. And so if you take away that public road right, unless we were in a subdivision which has private and public road rights, if you're just on a plain old public road and it's discontinued, you might not be able to get there from here. And so that was the whole idea of having that automatic retention of public easement to ensure that there's a public access, a public right of access that will allow people who live there, is that it doesn't necessarily include a maintenance obligation for some public entity, and it allows the public to go over. And so the logging truck, the ATV perhaps, or whatever, can go over and potentially damage what you do. And I think those are the effects we're seeing. But I think that it would be, a mistake not to have the automatic retention of some right to get to the house. In this case, it's the public easement, because otherwise you could wind up being landlocked, and that would be a bigger problem.
There's also the only access piece sometimes for people who have neighborhoods. Public easement is the only guarantee that they can get through against an adverse neighbor.
Right. Yeah, we saw some of that.
I
But again, doesn't that get back to what Brian said, is that maybe mandating some level of funding for the public easement rather than giving them the option. So towns know, okay, you're abandoning this, but you're keeping a public easement, and with that is some level of responsibility.
Well, there's two ways to do that. One is to say the town can take care of it. If they reach take care of it, fine. But if not, then they're going to pay damages, which is, I think, what Brian was saying. Well, pay damages, but what usually
The ongoing maintenance maybe isn't part of that calculation, and maybe it could work bad here.
what typically happens is municipalities would say, well, if we're going to discontinue it and there's not a public easement retained, then we're going to have to pay some real damages. But otherwise, if there's a public easement retained, people can still get there. So, $1 damages, we'll discontinue it. All good. It's not.
This is where I get into arguing Jordan versus Canton. I agree.
I thought we were going in.
You led up to it. It's a great segue. Yes, I agree with you, Rebecca, that Jordan versus Canton applies to a law that no longer exists. Because it's unconstitutional. But the reason that it no longer exists, the road is not publicly maintained, and the court said that would inevitably destroy the access. And destruction of access requires compensation, and the law didn't provide it. So now you look at what we've got in abandonment, particularly. Discontinued, there is a process for determining damages, but it's one-time damage when they discontinue the road. So you discontinue the road, the person who wants to get to his property rebuilds the road, somebody comes in and destroys it, he's just lost again. He rebuilds the road again, somebody else comes in and destroys it, he's just lost again. How do you compensate for that repeated damage that's going to happen in the future? And this, I think, is what Jordan versus Hanson is, destroying the road. And the decision even says it doesn't matter what the legal side of the road is. What matters is the factual and actual consequence of that legal action. And in the case of the public easement, the actual consequence of a public easement is that it will repeatedly get destroyed. Every time a landowner tries to rebuild it for his own access, somebody is going to say, oh, look, we can get in there now with our log trucks and harvest our land, and the road is gone again. In the first 20 years or so that David and I lived on our property, you were 10 years before I was, but in those first 20 years, we had a different logging operation in there about every 2 years. And every 2 years, you would rebuild the road, and the next year somebody would destroy it again. So how do you compensate that by making a one-time compensation, particularly in these towns that say, well, you know, you're not damaged because you still have access to the public easement, so we'll give you $1. Well, that does nothing to involve perceived destruction. So if the town could be responsible for keeping the road just to a minimal standard, just keep it passable, most of the people on these roads would be thrilled. If you come in a couple of times a year and grade it and put a load of gravel and more mud holes a year, eventually, by doing that year by year, the road is going to get to where it stays pretty well.
Should be part of the logging permit. They have to leave it as they found it.
Yeah, they say, no, we have a public easement, we have no responsibility to it, they use the road and they leave.
Who issues that logging permit?
Well, it must be forestry. Yeah. Like they have to have a logging permit at every logging operation. It says this is wool for harvesting. They have to have the harvesting permit there. And that should be, like, that would be the stipulation that, like, for logging, it's like, I mean, if you're logging in there, you have to leave the road as you found it when, like, your forester has to come in and do a forestry plan. So they should look at it and be like, okay, this is what documented the road looks like. And when they leave, it should be the same way that they found it.
Well, yeah, and I don't know how it works on public easements strictly, but like on roads that are closed to winter, we do have the authority to adopt a, what is it called? Yeah,
Weight limit.
well, not a weight limit, no, but like an ordinance that basically requires the logger to go into the town office and get a bond and get a permit and all of those things that if there is damage.
That's not an easement.
No, that's on a road that's closed.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a public easement, they technically could do the same
I
thing.
think so,
Yeah. I mean, that would solve that.
The town would,
very quick. It would have to be the town.
right, so you'd have to get your town to be willing to do that.
And I believe, though, that ordinance might fall under the law that allows even the board to do that without legislative vote. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because allowing it and mandating it is two different things. It's just allowed it, you not do it.
I think
Like
it should
the
be part of it.
effort to inventory roads years ago. We finally got a bill through that said that the town should inventory their discontinued roads, but at the last minute it got changed from March to May, and nobody did it.
But I think there's nothing now in a logging permit that says anything about road.
That's what I was just wondering. I don't know if there is, but I'm not.
Like a forestry logging, you should permit that, right?
I don't know, I don't think so. There could be, but I don't think so, because you see them posted, they're posted on the wood yard, travel 2 miles down one of these roads before they get to that point.
I know one case where there are two parallel discontinued roads. This one is the one we live on. This one nobody maintains. There's a wood lot on this one, and the guy who wants to harvest his wood off of this wood lot doesn't want to use the road that nobody's maintained. So he gets permission from a landowner on this road to go in, cross his land, harvest his land off the other road, and haul back out.
Yeah, you have to build the whole road to go in there.
I do know there's one case in Millbridge where a logger used a public easement, left the road in a mess after the private building the road so that they could get in and out of their house. And they tried several agencies to try to get the water to come back and fix the road. And finally, I think what they did was they went through the Fire Products Council or somebody like that, and the mill was notified, do not accept wood from this guy until he goes back and fixes the road. And he came back and he graded it and left it. And he didn't do an awful good job of grading. He didn't put it back to the condition that it was in before.
But the other reality that's out there, you know, unfortunately, is you got a landowner, you got a forester for the landowner, you got somebody else that's trucking the wood.
Yeah.
So you got a whole bunch of people going, and it makes it very difficult, which is why you end up, if anything, you end up with a court case. Because for Chris or the forest ranger or who else, it's like, who did this? And who's responsible? And that, you know, the days of Great Northern owning the property and the crews worked for them and the truckers worked for them and all that, that's all history. That doesn't exist anymore today. And we just lost the case. I mean, state of Maine, we were cutting wood on Duck Lake and the woodcutter just said, I'm done, I'm out of here, because the mill that won the bid to take the wood was different than the original plan, and now he's going to have to truck it further. He said, so my bid is no longer valid. So he left the job site and the whole thing's falling apart. Now the mill's falling, we aren't getting any wood, and we're not cutting any wood, but there's multiple people involved in it. They all went that way years ago, thinking we can build the road cheaper and we can do this cheaper and whatever, than just all of one. But now it's coming full circle. And everybody's tight for the dollar, so if they can use somebody else's road, and if it's frozen, they're probably not going to hurt it, but whether it's like
every year there are more and more attempts to limit municipal authority to restrict any sort of logging operation because there are continual thaw zones in January where there typically weren't anymore, and folks can't get to their wood lots during that brief thaw period, and they're getting frustrated by the fact that municipalities don't want to be continuing to maintain those sections that are house damaged because they're running through the mud.
Rick, look at the scenario in Oslo you mentioned, right? I mean, they destroyed that road, and that was a huge uproar over that, and that happened in the middle of winter. I mean, this coming weekend, we're going to see this happen in the real world.
Yeah, the definition of what is a frozen road. Because on our road we had one situation where the road had thawed completely, and then we got a cold night. That water, that was the road person came in and get his wood out. And we called the code enforcement officer, somebody called them, and they came out and they said, I thought the road was frozen. I thought, yeah, the top inch is frozen. And that was all frozen. And that's not a long track. So how do you define frozen?
Well, that was one of the other things that I don't know if we fix this, but all of these definitions, whether it's private road, private way, whatever, public way, is that same definition as some of the others? I mean, you wonder if we could get all of the definitions the same within the statute. That might make things a little less confusing, but I don't know how to do that.
One advantage we have now is that the computers, you can type in the word search or phrase search, and it will tell you every place in the main statutes where that term shows up. We didn't have that back when we started on this, and I suggested at one point, can we make all the terminology the same to all the statutes? They go, oh, we can't do that. Something was so hard now.
Well, you didn't want to change. If you go that route, impact a lot. It's what are we doing that we don't know we're doing? You know, it's like if we outlawed automatic ATV use on a public easement, thinking, all right, that means the public easement going there to just trash it without having permission. But somehow we now prevented permission being granted as well, so abutters can't even use it. Well, nobody intended to do that. That's the problem. Start making those kind of changes.
We have a couple of the butters that are, they have health issues around our road. And we put her up and down the road on their ATVs and nobody complains. restricted maybe what we call chicken tracks, besides that, to use it. I agree with you, there should be some way of specifying some exceptions there. Landowner should be able to use it on his own land, certainly, but can he also use it on the rest of the road he lives on?
But who specify? Council? The abutter?
Well, under law, there's municipal or county or unit of government
Right.
to designate a way and has authority.
I can't sue anybody. That's what I was saying. You're opening up Pandora's box, right? Because you're saying, like that's the problem is you can't limit access. So you say, yeah, you're going to use that as an ATV route. Like everybody's coming. Like if they got a wheeler, they're going to head. So then you're like, well,
Yeah, I mean, we've had towns try to make access routes only open in town. Yeah, but there's no legal,
That's all constitution.
yeah, we understand.
So, is there, I know there's maybe one person disagreeing, but is there general agreement that it's a good idea to retain a public easement after discontinuance or abandonment of the townway?
I think some access needs to be kept, but whether it should be a public use or not, that's why I like the idea of giving the landowners the option of agreeing to make it a private easement in common. That idea actually, I was the first one who came up with it. I didn't know somebody else had come up with it first, but in the town of I'm trying to think what it is, Newbury, town of Newbury. There were some landowners who had a discontinued road that crossed the property and went into the next town, and they were having problems with people from the next town coming through. And they went to the county and said, can you just continue this road? And we're the only ones that need it for access. They can, people from the other town can access from their end, but we're the only ones who need it. Can we just continue it? And the county said, we can't discontinue that road because under the county discontinuance, it was going to landlock the people on their side of the town line. And they said, but if you landowners will agree to grant each other private easements, sure, then we'll discontinue it. And that's what they did, and it worked, and it's still working. And this was years ago. This was while counties still had the authority to discontinue the roads in town. So it was before July of 1976.
So something needs to be kept, but in your mind, it could be either the public easement that we know and love now, or private easement in common.
Yeah, I mean, does the private easement in common though get to all the same?
All the landowners would have rights.
that's what, like, I look at the public easement as, like, especially from our perspective, like, hey, listen, like, it's access to hunting, fishing, trapping, everything like that. I mean, the 40 acres may be posted past the public easement, but there may be 200 that's connected to it that somebody can get into that. So that's where the public easement, from our eyes, is important.
Yeah, because the private easement wouldn't provide that, right?
I would agree. If you make it private, you've eliminated any chance of having trail or anything going both.
Well, yes and no. I'd say there are two solutions to this. One is, okay, if the public wants to keep a public easement for the recreational use, they should provide enough maintenance to support whatever use they keep. They just wanted the snowmobile trails, and it's not going to be a whole lot of maintenance. It's not going to disturb the soil. If they want it as an ATV trail, they're going to have to put something in.
But I guess who does that decision is made by the town, so who does that fall on? Because then you're saying, like, I mean, if it's an ATV trail, it's a snowmobile trail, the guy with the 4x4 pickup truck comes through that lives in Fayette, where's his money come from? It's not a road tax, like, I mean, it's not his gas tax that goes to the public easement. So, like, you're going to hit the snowmobile clubs and the ATV clubs for the money that the damage is caused by something else.
But if you allow good, or is it specified that it would be just...
Well, it says right now that public easement that a 4x4 motor vehicle can operate there.
Yeah, on the public easement as it is now, pretty much anything can operate there.
Yeah, so you can control it, it's sort of
Well, going forward.
Right.
So, all the other ones that are going to be sent that law into effect, all the ones historically are.
Every road that's going to be discontinued in the future are considered for that. Every one of these is a different situation. One of them is dead ends because they get down to maybe nothing or hydrogen. shortcuts between two public roads and there's no one there, but every one of these is different, and some of them, because there is no possibility of landlocking anybody, and others, everything is different here. So why not let the abutters, the property owners, the landowners are on that road decide what to do? You're not necessarily landlocking someone. Maybe you are, but if that's the case, if it was public land or something out there, then that should be addressed as, no, we can't shut this off. But if it's all private property, why not let the abutters?
The problem is that 95% of the state of Maine is privately owned. So you're not talking, like, in all those right now, which is, like, it's not pure public lands, it's not, we don't own a lot of government land here in the state of Maine. It's very highly sought after because it's owned by you and I. So without that ability to get out there, it's hard to recreate sometimes, like if you're limiting access. Like we're dealing with it right now with boat moorings. Like there's a boat mooring, well, I saw in the paper today, Winthrop Town. So they made a mooring ordinance that was limiting the access to the lake. So they're saying that the moorings there in town could not be used. They could only have a mooring if you were a property owner. Well, they can't do that. Like you have to provide 10% of the mooring to provide a spot for those people who don't live on the body of water to have a mooring. And I think that somewhat you're limiting access there if you're saying that there's like.
I mean, that most coastal communities have mooring plans.
Correct.
That was inland lakes don't, and
correct.
And more people from away are just throwing moorings.
Yeah,
but
it was meant for.
That's beyond our jurisdiction.
Yeah. So it is limiting.
If you have 6 people who live on a road, and you have a private easement, and a public. So all 6 landowners, we'll call them landowners at this point, have access, but nobody else does.
Unless they get permission.
Yes. You get permission from who?
One of the landowners.
One or all?
Well, as far as you want to go down the road, I guess you need to have it, right? To be gated. It could, and you could get the situation where, 4 of them decide to be nice folks, and 2 of them who live near the front of the road decide to be jerks, and they do put the gate up.
Which we see.
Yeah, we've got reports about it here, we've heard about it.
And as I understand it, the courts have ruled against those gates. So when you go forward,
There's the potential that the people who live down the road have to file a lawsuit against the people who are blocking their access. There's a greater potential for that. That's why you'd like to see a friendly situation where the private easements are worked out in this road association. And that's what the discontinuance law encourages for that first year. The idea being, come up with private agreements. We don't want public easement. We'll work it out. But you don't know that those private relations always will work out. Someone may want to try to lock someone else's access, and it all goes downhill fast.
I think a lot of the problem with gates is either public easement or private easement. There was a road that was discontinued before public easements were capped. And one person buys land on both sides of the road and says, okay, I only consider one from both sides, I'm blocking up. In cases where the new law is applying, where the landowners are given a year in which to work out easements, a couple of things I see that could be improved for that. One is to make it clear that if they can't all agree, if some of them can agree, particularly the ones farthest in, it's usually it's the ones near the beginning of the road who want to block it and keep everybody else out. If you say, okay, the ones farthest in are going to make it a private easement for their 2 pieces of property, but the beginning of the road is going to remain a public easement so that nobody can block them from getting in. Then hopefully after a few years they're going to look at the road and say, no, that part beyond us is in pretty good shape because only the landowners are using it and they're maintaining it. The part that I'm on is still a public easement, nobody's maintaining it. So maybe they'll join in. And I think this is another thing that could be fixed in the law, is to say that it doesn't have to be done in that first year. Give them a year at least in which to work it out. if they haven't marked it up by the end of that year, if 5 years down the road they say, you know, on second thought, this public easement isn't such a great idea because the public's ruining our road, let's look at that again. They should, and this looks like a law as it can't be kept ambiguous because the title on it, it says that it's the process for discontinuing townways and public easement, which implies that you can use it to discontinue a public easement. But then you go down into the process, and it doesn't really mention public easements again. It sounds like it's just for discontinuing townways.
That sounds like we're looking at A4, the statutory process for abandonment or discontinuance of a road. And that's an interesting thought that we'll call the first few 100 feet maybe a public easement and see how that all works temporarily. But that's going to make it really tough for the realtor, the attorney doing title, for anybody looking at this to understand what's going on. Before 1965, it wasn't a public easement, but they could retain the public easement. Back then it was called private way subject to case and bars. You have to understand all of that. You have to understand that roads being county to county or discontinued by county commissioners until it became townways in 1977. You have to understand that the law changed in 65 to the automatic protection of the public easement. And then the law has been changing over the last 6 or 7 years so that when a discontinuance occurs, the process all changes. Changing the process is going to make it harder for people to analyze and look at it and be able to give you an answer report. Or an attorney or seller in real estate to check that box, status of the road. You're going to get garbage or unknown.
That's why the new law says that when you discontinue a road, you have to follow it with the DOT and the registry of deeds. So on the recent discontinuances, anybody should be able to go to the registry of deeds or the DOT and say, what status of this road? It should be all in practice. Technically, there was a law, still on board, Title 23, Section 3224, that says that when a road is discontinued, it should be registered with the registry of deeds. But because it comes before 3026, you have to put the discontinuance process and then put factors if you want to see if there's something further about it. No, you continue on from there. So very few towns even knew that that law existed. And the language of it is so garbled that it sounds like you could file with the registry of deeds and not notify anybody on the road and it would be legal. Or you could notify everybody on the road except one, and it would be legal except everybody, be legal against everybody except that one. How do you discontinue a road for everybody except one person? You can't do that. So the language is so confusing. I think that's part of the reason that we don't have these filings that they were supposed to be filed. If people had done that, or if that law had been clearer in a place where else could find it, then we might have a record for all the roads discontinued since 1959. But we don't.
With that, would it make sense to quicken the meeting to 1 o'clock, take maybe 5 to 10 minutes just to clear our heads out and then come back and see if we can wrap things up in terms of consensus for a report? Does that make sense? We can maybe walk away from it.
Everybody must have worked on remotely on.
Particularly with regards to property owners along public easements and how we might do something to protect them from liability or minimize their liability if they go out and fix it and the town doesn't. Public easement retention, I think there's a sort of a division, there is a division of opinion with, how many people support the retention of the automatic retention of a public easement where a road is abandoned or discontinued? That's
a hard question.
Well, right now that's what the law does. Do you support the continuation of that? And
I support making sure that there is access, that nobody becomes landlocked.
okay,
But how that's done is another question.
how many people support that idea? Supporting retention of some access and then once landlocked. Yeah.
That's not standard.
We have unanimity. Write that down.
It's probably not going to happen again.
So, as to the nature of that access, issue is, whether it's a public easement or a limited access road, I think is the other idea. There is a procedure to discontinue it, but is there a procedure to disabandon it? No, if abandonment happens, as one municipal attorney once described it, abandonment happens because a municipality doesn't do what it's supposed to do long enough that it doesn't have to do it anymore. So, what it is, 30 years of non-maintenance is a presumption. If the town doesn't spend money to maintain our town way for 30 years or more, then it's presumed that it's no longer a town way.
Gee, what if I won't clean my road for 30 years, I don't have to anymore?
So in that case, is it treated as discontinued or as discontinued?
Until recently, it's had the same effect as a discontinuance, which means the parties on the center line and there's a public easement that's retained.
So, but now it's not that way anymore?
Well, it's a little bit different now because the changes have been made in the last couple of sessions. And so now when you go to discontinue, there's that 1 year period for the parties to work it out before you propose discontinuance. And in the event of an abandonment, the easement that's retained is a little bit different than it used to be. It's only for vehicles, motor vehicles, not ATVs, not snowmobiles, and for pedestrians.
So when you do a discontinuance, it isn't necessarily that same limitation.
It's a public easement but without that same express limitation.
So if you discontinue a road with a public easement, ATV might only can be. Well, at least they can.
It's at least like correct, if you don't want to protect like that.
Whereas on the abandonment, they are
Because they're not a motor vehicle. You check forward and going forward.
today, if one gets abandoned.
Right. And you look at the end of that 30 or more consecutive year period, and if it's happened, then that's when the abandonment occurs. That's when it's effective. At the end of that 30-year period.
There are two other things that come in there, 28A. It says that the boardman has a discretion of planning common law abandonment, which leaves no easement. And it doesn't say that they can only do that if they won't landlock anybody. Now that comes in the problem.
That's always been the common law, though. That if the town is stopped, if people stop using the way.
That's the key.
Right.
And common law has to be no use. But the abandonment statute doesn't say that common law is for no use. It says that they can decide that they're going to claim common law abandonment.
Right, but then you look at common law abandonment, and it says no use.
I think that maybe needs to be clarified.
But that's, yeah, I mean, you can abandon a road at common law, and they're in the books for years. And so if the public stops using a road, it's a road.
It's funny you say that because I was just thinking, and I know there's a lot of these roads that if the ATVs and snowmobile clubs didn't use them, there wouldn't be no way that anybody could get through with a 4x4 pickup or like any type of motor vehicle.
But if the public stops using the road, it used to be easier before ATVs and snowmobiles and everything else could say, oh, it's been through several years, it's got track, and it's going over, and you see the bushes and trees where there used to be a road. Trees going up through it. Right, exactly. And that's 20 consecutive years or more at common law. It's no longer a public way. And so at that point, there is no public easement, it's nothing. And you need money. And what the presumption of abandonment statute was a short of a test. If we haven't spent money to maintain it for at least 30 consecutive years, then probably abandoned. So that's the presumption of abandonment. It's sort of a marker so you don't have to go to court on each one of these common laws.
Well, who hasn't spent money? I mean, if you got a phone bill call out there and spending money, that's choosing to make money.
Municipality.
So just
As a municipality spent money to fix the road, to maintain the road.
And the other thing I was going to say is that on discontinuance, where they change the public easement, then the question is which definition of public easement do you go by? Because if you go by the definition in section 3022, a public easement is for access by foot or motor vehicle. And that definition excludes the ATVs and snowmobiles.
And that's the definition of 3026A as it's been redone for abandonment.
it's paying now, isn't it?
But it isn't the same definition for discontinuance.
So where does it say in the discontinuance which definition they're using?
It doesn't.
That's
just
about
public easement.
it.
It's too much fun, and that gets us into 2A3, where you talk about statutory terminology related to abandoned or discontinued roads, and it's public easements versus private ways versus private roads. There's a lot of interplay there.
I do know that the Maine Road Association is working with Kessler and McCalley on a bill that would clarify the definition for the terms private way and private road. It would say that a private road is a road that's privately owned, privately maintained, and over which the owner can restrict access. And a private way is a complete term should be taken off the books and replaced by public easement.
Suggest that there be clarification of terminology and just acknowledge that their statement. Yeah, their statement. Okay. Well, we can reach some consensus on. One article we're asked to, one area we're asked to think about and to come back with our considerations, the statutory process for the abandonment or discontinuing of a road, including barriers to determining the legal status of a road. Legal status of the road. I don't know what we're supposed to do with that. We've talked about the process. We've talked about the fact that it's changed several times. I think people have expressed that it's expensive to try to determine its time, the expensive litigation to do. There's been thought, I think, toward suggesting mediation might be possible. And although mediation is required in litigation, you file a lawsuit, and these days there's now mandatory mediation for a civil dispute. You got to file a complaint and act as though you're going to go to court to litigate with all the expense that entails to get to that. Is there some other way to mediate these disputes? Is that something that I'm hearing people suggest? Is it court?
Jim, I don't know much about the court system, but this mediation, what you just said, does that apply mediation to small claims court, district court cases, superior court cases? Just superior court.
Generally, yeah. Cases that are big enough to be brought in superior court in civil litigation, there's mandatory mediation at this point.
Is that for all superior court cases? So it's not only with the only getting cards to certain categories of cases.
Well, okay, most civil litigation will wind up that way. If it's what we call a Rule 80B dispute, where it's planning board or a board of appeals appeal, it's not going to go there because that's going to have its own on the record, and it is what it is. But if you're talking about an opportunity for mediation of your construction dispute on your real estate purchase, general civil cases that we see. So that has to be in the court process, which opens you up for all the time and expense and risk of litigation. I'm hearing something a little different, that if there's some way to have mediation specifically to road cases. Is that something that you'd like to suggest?
I would like to suggest that. Some sort of streamline long-term dispute resolution, specifically for these kinds of cases.
Again, not knowing much about the court system, that was one of my three things was, I assume is for the big cases that a lot of big decisions made at superior court. Why can't this be a lower court decision where it's a lot cheaper and quicker?
And the answer is that this is not, district court is for the smaller criminal matters, for criminal matters, and it's also for smaller disputes, small claims. I think small claims limit is $6,000. But it's a low, it's a nominal amount, so this would not go to small claims court.
So you're saying road issues like this,
They always go to superior court.
simple or complicated, can't go to small claims or district?
The declaratory judgment actions, and those have the original jurisdiction in the superior court.
Superior court's the right place for this thing.
Yes, sir. Okay. District court is more, I consider like family matters. Well, family law and the typical criminal, breaking and entering kind of thing, smaller class crimes.
But this sits in like some enforcement issues and things like that. And tax abatements, that all gets appealed to Superior Court. So I think it makes sense to go there. Because you're asking the court to declare the rights and obligations of the parties, declaratory judgment action, and those are always brought in the Superior Courts. That's a serious situation, and you could wind up, you will wind up with a bench trial, and it'll take a couple of days to get through one of these, which is why it's so expensive.
My question is whether we can plug into some programs that already exist. Is the family and community intervention service, which I think they charge $175 per person for the whole process, which is certainly a lot cheaper than $300 and some odd dollars per hour for an attorney. And then there's the cooperative extensions agricultural mediation, free if there's either farmland or farmland in production involved. A few years ago, they changed the limited liability to where it used to say, not limited liability, the one where it talks about if someone damages farmland or farmland in production, it's a class E crime. A few years ago, they changed that to say, or in public easement. So if there's any one public easements in the farmland and farmland in production in that statute, can we somehow get that in under the agricultural mediation program? That's public easement.
So basically look at some existing mediation programs to see if that could be the place to bring alternative dispute resolution.
And that might involve seeing if we can get some extra funding for them to the work solutions. This will be one of our list of funding requests in addition to our ongoing work with auditors. So have a big ticket to it.
Well, the Superior Court has a business docket. I don't know that they want a road docket, but there we go. They have one, they just looking at business cases. So when we drop down for matters relating to abandoned and discontinued roads, other than these four topics that we've just been talking about, we're supposed to prioritize matters for consideration by the Commission by determining which matters have significant negative impact on owners of property that have an abandoned or discontinued road, owners of property accessible only by traveling over one, recreational users, members of the public, local government, state government. The prioritization, I guess, is a piece of what we were talking about and all we took a look at and considered. When we haven't bumped into dealing with 1 through 4, what comes to the top? What's the major issue you see?
Lawful access, so they need to discontinue law easements, or they need to discontinue with an easement for anything maintained. Not publicly maintained.
What do we think about that? The property owner or the property owner access issue, is that primary? I just think the liability side of it would be.
Mm-hmm.
The situations we've had, the guy that's trying to do the right thing, but still don't rise. That's a make it or break it going ahead if they get dragged into that.
Yeah, because as it stands right now, if you're a private landowner on a road close to the winter, and you go out and plow it to get into your camp or whatever, and there's an accident, you're automatically at fault because the law says you don't have the right to be doing that.
Close to winter maintenance, I don't think so. I think that's separate, but certainly if it were, you have to be, if it were a town way, you can't be doing work on it. And I think that's the issue. You shouldn't be working on a town way. And then the question is, it's closed for winter maintenance. So MMA would say, yes, you can allow, to get your own property, you can maintain, and you're not liable. I guess, we'll see what happens. You're not liable. It's definitely not liable. Right.
So then that begs the question
question, who is?
Well,
Why can't you live in a country where somebody's got to do that?
right, you know, it's like that, maybe it's never been tested. Personal responsibility. And what he's saying is, he has a cat that he plows the road to with the town away, and somebody else goes on that road, has an accident, and that road was technically closed by the municipality for winter maintenance. Now all of a sudden it's open. Can the person sue the person who opened it up? You know, he didn't sand it, and it was slippery because I stuff that way, but the town would never have opened it again.
Yeah, every person plowing by closed by in that case.
You know, if I was the plow driver, I would have gotten a sign release from you. This is the property owner before going on that road. Took our own current GPS that he could go down that road. I mean, there's so many. I know. Yeah.
I think that goes to John's point. The liability issue's got to be addressed here. People got to make their own.
I asked about the GPS thing, but I've seen travel trailers that why road closed. Drive by it and they told them to close.
We see it all the time in Tomo making each other. They're literally stuck with 18 wheels.
Yeah,
Well, first year Poland's the wrong get stuck on something. It happens, I mean, I think at least a dozen cases with Poland spring trucks.
I mentioned there's
All of their GPSs.
a couple down the road, well road, like when the pandemic hit, we had such an influx of people in the outdoors. And we're going up there in the middle of the winter, which is winter maintenance, and we had 8 vehicles stuck, and we're trying to get to the mouth of and we're driving by them, and we're like, we'll get a tow truck for you eventually, but you're going to have to start walking back 7 miles. And they were just clueless, so they're just driving up the road that's 2 feet of snow. Google Maps said I could. Yeah, Google Maps, so that's all true. Well, they were just there with like Subaru, like, well, because they could go a while, they went a while, right? Because they could ride on the snow, right? They could ride over and just like, oh my God.
We had somebody who was commenting on the thing there that liability isn't the main issue, access is.
I don't think they're both issues. I think liability would cure a lot of the accidents.
Yeah, that's what I can do. I think access is an issue. I mean, it's a variety of reasons, but the concern about liability prevents access. I mean, we see private landowners closing land all the time because they're scared of liability.
You're talking about access to the snowmobile center.
It's just everything.
Oh, you're talking about
We're talking about landowner access. If you can't get to your property,
right. Yeah, there's landowner access and then recreational access, and they really are already the recreational access point. But that is a concern. The Snowmobile Association in the state of Maine did an economic impact study that just snowmobile alone in nights are supposed to be north of that now. So if that money doesn't come in, the taxes will be quite a bit higher if the access goes away.
Can you say that again? 606 billion.
606 million is what was figured out in 19 by Force.
The ATV is supposed to be 746.
For sale tax alone? No, I just got to know that.
So that's, all the multipliers, the jobs.
I'm just going back to your comment, Roberta, about like, access by the people, like by the people that own the land down there. Like, I mean, I'm just trying to think, like, why don't they have access all the time? Like, I mean, the winter access, like,
we're talking about if you buy a piece of land and you think, I want to discontinue the road on it, or that I won't build my own access, you build your own access, and the lawyer goes to the next piece of property and says, oh, look, I can get my land now, you use it, tears it out, leaves you with no access. You rebuild it,
right.
a mud runner comes in at the height of mud season, drives up and down the same 2 ruts on a hill, the water runs down those ruts, washes out and covers it, and the mud,
the reason why I asked that is because it goes back to our comment about like people that are using it having to reimburse them for leaving it the way it is, like with the logging permits and stuff. It's not like limited access. Maintaining the road so it's traveled, you can travel it, is what the access issue is for the landowner.
There are 2 sides to that. There's the problem that I just said is access when the public easement, other people control that. And there's the other problem, the roads that were discontinued years ago before the jet public easement. And now somebody buys property on both sides of the road and shuts off the
Right. So it seems like there are really three almost co-equal issues in terms of priority: access, liability, and then maintenance, prevention of damage to the roads. I think we probably heard all of those comments in equal amounts from people.
And when they're all tied together.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Chris, your question was really helpful. I'll ask you to say it again, Roberta, because the number of times you said this, sometimes the word sort of loses their meaning. You can paint the picture.
Because the way you just, like with the landowner that owns both sides of the road and closes it off, but I think that's almost sometimes a separate issue when it comes down to like public way or anything like that. I mean, a lot of times those ones that I've seen are a private road. They're not even, like there's not even a question, and they're gating it across. They're doing it because they can, but they put it in, they come to us to see if they can have the access. I don't know if that's...
Some of these roads are doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'm not saying...
And that's what's really crazy, because if you live beyond it, and all of a sudden now you are landlocked at that point.
Right.
Well, what happened on these old roads, the ones that are discontinued before 1965, or in a lot of cases, the landowners kept on using the road, and they've been using it for over 20 years, often over 30 years, 40 years, and legally, they could claim that they have an easement by prescription, because they have used the road, I don't know the road anymore, when the road was discontinued without easement, it became a patchwork of whole pieces of private property. And so if somebody continues to use that, without the permission of the landowner, but with their acquiescence, for 20 years or more, open and unobstructed, open and notorious, so that anyone can see that they're using it and isn't objecting, then technically they should be able to claim an easement by prescription. But in order to confirm that, you have to go to court.
And somebody could say, I don't have an easement by prescription.
Right. So somebody new moves in, buys property on both sides of the road, and closes it. Now what that person has to do now?
Have they gone with the prior landowner into court and claim that easement by prescription before the new owner came in?
Well, typically happen is somebody may have been using that for 30 years, and then they tried at the beginning, and they buy land on both sides of the road, puts up the gates and bars, and the person who's been there for 30 years and then has to sue those people, and $75,000, and 2 years later they'll get a decision from the state Supreme Court that yes, they have a right to take those bars down, and they do have that, but you've got to go through all the hoops to get there. It doesn't really seem right, does it?
Is there a way to make that process easier?
Well, that's maybe what your ADR, an alternative dispute resolution. I'll ask Mike.
Okay. What about if you went to the county commissioners?
People's
We all knew
the people come. Great. So, I'm trying to get some direction from you, but I think we've got it in terms of looking at those three issues together. I'm going to throw something out there, so I've heard it from different people in different ways. And that is, imagine that you're going to buy that property on a road. You don't know, is it a townway? It says townway in the deed, but as we all know, that doesn't mean anything. Because is the town actually maintaining it? Has it been discontinued in the interim? Have people stopped living there and using it for over 20 to 30 years so that it doesn't really matter what it says on my deed? All those things could have happened. And the realtor might look at the DOT's site that Pete has told us about, but all that says is whether the town's currently maintaining the road. It doesn't say what the road status is. There's been talk about some idea of requiring road inventorying. Certainly it's been recommended. It was recommended by MMA Legal Services and has been for Joe Watson. He was like, very close to that I was.
I don't know if this is the first one.
Yeah.
1990.
Yeah. So it goes back a way. It's been recommended. There's a cost to doing it, and as you can tell, even at the municipal level, with all the records they have, if you were to try to do this, there's still going to be instances where you don't really know. So how do you do that? Whose obligation is it to prepare a road inventory? Who's going, if that's a good idea, who's going to pay? And what do we do in those instances?
I think it needs to be done in steps, not try to do it all at once. Start by putting on a map that everybody can see the roads you know that the town does maintain. And then, bit by bit, start figuring out the others. Start maybe with private roads, which a lot of that information you get from E911. And then go through town records, find out where you can pin down where the road is going to be discontinued. Go through the DOT map viewer and see where there's a county road that was discontinued. And you're going to at least get a lot of them. And granted, there are some that are going to be real puzzles where, okay, we have a vote to discontinue the road from Joe Smith's Bend to the State Aid Road. Where's that? Yeah, you're going to have puzzles that are going to take some real effort to find out where they're at. But if you can at least check some of them, that's going to be a help.
So who's going to do that?
Hmm.
Well, why don't you do it?
So there's two things there, I think, from an animated perspective as well, that the inventory alone doesn't determine the status.
Right.
It doesn't even tell you if it was maintained or the status. So they're two different things, and there's still our due process, right? So if the town says that's our road, there are still due process rights for the folks that live on that road who don't think it is. So that is going to come into play with that process. The reason that statute was changed in May was because the legislature did not want to fund it. And by the Constitution, is required to do so when they expand municipal duties. They have to provide that or provide that. 100% or 60? 90, right? 90. Federal price tag is on the number of roads and the legal fees to pay them to sort out their stuff. And decided, we're not going to do that. It's not.
Do you have a recommendation on how you get this process started from your angle? What is the process to identify inventory on what is maintained or what the legal status of every road, public and private is?
Well, they're two different
What are we asking for here? Because one's pretty easy to do, the other one's not easy.
That's what you do know, and then chip away at what you don't know.
Well, his website, we review so many of these things, and if you look at map viewer, yes, it's all about maintenance. And I will tell you that 90-95% of it is correct. There's not a lot of tweaking there to be made, but every time I go into to do a review, I always come out of it with some little changes that amount to not much. That's why it's 90-95% correct. From a maintenance perspective, and I always tell them when I sit down with them, I say, look, I'm here to talk about what you maintain, period, right? I'm assuming, and you're assuming here, that what you're maintaining is truly, indeed, a legal town way, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I want to know what you maintain. What you guys plow, what you grade, what you pay, right? And the downside of relying on that is that it might be a public easement, correct? That the town's not obligated to maintain. So in 2023, they may be maintaining it, but next year, the town may decide it's too much money. We're not going to spend that anymore. That road will be finished.
That's true, but it doesn't have a whole lot. If you're a realtor, in your point of sale, you look at what's currently going on, you can't predict what's going to happen 20 years from now. That's not true. Certainly a responsibility, but at least requiring them to look at that.
Yeah. So if we tie the realtor disclosure to DOT's website on town maintained roads.
Right, because the simple reality is you're going to have a bunch of other roads out there that, well, what is the status? Bottom line is we don't know. So if it's not on, if this piece of land you're trying to buy is not on a currently maintained road, think carefully before you buy it, right?
Right. Well, remember, if I want to fill in the map viewer thing, one of the costs, the bring with the town maintained roads, as they weren't colored, that data set is coming from the 911 office. Not just DOTs, DOT 911, and where anybody lives. And so it's public or private. the idea there is that if you want to know the legal status, you have to do your due diligence, but at least is it town maintained, and as of right now, DOT says yes.
And, all these reviews that I've done, there's not a lot changed in roads. Roads have been in place for years and years and years and years and years. If I pull out an inventory, if I go pull something out, and I go into an inventory, I'm not coming out of there with all water change. It's little stuff. Well, yeah, we go to the barn, we don't, it's 100 feet here, it's 100 feet there. It's not much. It's not significant. What about those other people? Well, the only reason those would be missing lines is if the averaging officer didn't do their job and submit it into the PUC as a subdivision, and it's supposed to put, is it publicly maintained or privately maintained? You check one box or the other. If it's anything public, PUC automatically sends it to me to DOT, and what that means on map viewer, it will go from a shaded road to a blue road. But that doesn't happen a whole lot. That's why, if anybody uses map viewer to look at who maintains it, for realtor purposes, you've probably got 95% chance that it's going to be correct.
So we need to give the realtors the tools that they can use. They need to know that they can go
Yeah,
back and
that's what I suggested as the first thing in mind was, let's do some training with the Maine Realtors Association, or whatever it's called.
Well, the other thing is, I haven't looked at one of these disclosures, but do we have the option there for the non-maintained road?
Well, I haven't looked at the disclosure in a while. It isn't quite so clean, but we can make sure that we can recommend that the law be consistent with what's out there for data for people to look at it.
That just means having another box there that,
Or the language of the box to be consistent with what DOT has available.
What it says, I believe, is that if the road is not maintained by the public, then let's disclose who does maintain it if known.
I got it right here. It says access to the property. Information describing the means of accessing the property by 1, a public way, any means other than a public way, in which case the seller shall disclose information about who is responsible for maintenance of the means of access, including any responsible road association, and MP Senate phrase, if known by the seller.
And where this has worked very well is because I'm also involved with the Maine Road Associations, and they said my daughter is on a private road that's maintained by a road association. We're finding that when a piece of property on that road is sold, the realtor will get in touch with the road association and say, who is the contact person, what are your bylaws, what are your annual dues, and they will give that information to the buyer. So for that piece of it, that has worked very well. When it comes to the roads that are unknown or that don't have a road association, or where it's an informal road association, in other words, David Manter is taking care of the road, the good graces of his own heart, and he's tired of doing it, that doesn't get put on the form.
Maybe the more relevant question is the road publicly maintained or not? And or does it show up on the DOT? You would determine that you're looking at DOT's map viewer.
And the other thing I would add to that is make sure that if it's one word you don't know, or it's maybe, or the public easement, I think the buyer should be given some information as to what that means. For example, going back to what Matt Robinson was saying, what if the man said no when he bought the property? Well, we knew it was discontinued, closed, private way, segregation matters. What we didn't know was what that meant. Private way, that's something private, wasn't it?
So if the box is unknown, then they get a copy of Maine Municipal Association's Municipal Roads Manual.
I want from when David bought the property to when Tom started the process. Like it could have been instant, right?
In 1971, and I think by 1979 he already had a lawsuit going against the lawyer that would come and go start to that, no doubt.
I guess in reference to that, like
he could, like if we could get the statutory terminology like straightened out, so it was like a little bit better, he could refer them to that, like if it's not publicly maintained, right, and refer them to the language there so that they actually have a clear understanding of what that road actually means, because then they'll probably start running the other direction and leave. I mean, like, there must have been people starting to use that road, like, I'm assuming if it was a private way is what is the problem, right?
They probably didn't.
But at some point you must have started seeing vehicle traffic going by.
Come to think of it, the terminology didn't change until 1976. So up until 1976, it was still called a private way.
Nobody else was using it.
There were other people beginning to use it, but it wasn't a real problem until that border came in.
Yeah. It increased the accessibility.
Right. Like I joke that Maine ROADWays motto is build a better public easement than only speak the pathway to your door. But something you get past it, the public says, oh, we can use the road now, and they say, you're doing it.
We should get that on a t-shirt, we can get our $500 for that. There you go.
I can say it, and most of the road people.
All copycats of that all. So I think that gives us some directions to put together a draft report. Anyone have any additional comments or thoughts? Anyone haven't said anything, like to jump in and
Go home.
send me an email. I was thinking of reply home, so just don't read while you're driving. Okay, so if your main DOT website, I don't know, eliminate 90 to 95% of the issues, right? We're just dealing with 5% of the issues. Correct. That's right. For people buying property, yes, it should limit the amount of issues. Those roads where people aren't sure what happens because it's not publicly maintained, that is going to be up to due diligence and statutes and maybe some lawsuits and maybe some mediation to figure out. Or most of what we're dealing with in that category, though. That's what the point. You've got a not showing. There are roads that the website doesn't show that being maintained. Correct.
Here's where I would suggest crowdsourcing. I have a couple of volunteers already who are starting to read through all the town reports, looking for all the discontinued that they can find. And some of them, they said, are going to be the ones where it's, the Joe Smith barn and who knows where it is. But if they can at least document the ones that we can pinpoint where they are, then that can be added to the database. And the more people can get doing that, I know if I advertise on Maine ROADWays, I'd probably get some more people who are willing to do it at least for their own town. I do know that Eastward has done their own survey. Somebody in Bodenham did his. There's somebody that's working out in Brown and Avon and Phillips and roads in that area. Yes, we do know, so how that's going to help.
Along those lines, like where would the database be kept, or who does hold that data?
DOT?
Well, I mean, it's not publicly, like it's not publicly maintained, so it's like they only care about all roads, right?
Well, the division of rights of way already has the county discontinuances, because years ago, Daniel Harriman and a couple of other people went to all the county records and copied out everything that had to do with roads. And so they've already got that in the division of rights of way, but it's only for county roads, that doesn't go for town roads. So if we can do the same kind of thing for town roads, I don't know why they couldn't add that to their database.
Well, I think it might be that a road status inventory would be ideal for those instances where the roads are questionable. We don't know. But there are issues as to who's going to prepare the database, who's going to maintain it, who's going to pay for that. And until those are resolved, the commission's not ready to make any recommendations on that. It would be funny to maintain a website. Yeah. That makes sense? And it's not perhaps the answer you'd like to hear with those people who are working in the registries now.
I'll have to get in touch with the guy in that part of the DOT and see what he's going to say. The other piece of it is, well, what I'm saying is for your crowdsource, it doesn't talk to anyone. The other piece of it is a little.
pieces of the conversation that it doesn't really realistically live with any of our holding and jobs. So
another piece of it is that I've been working for some time on updating my impressions on the Maine ROADWays website for how to research a road. And I'm pretty close to having it brought so that I'm going to post it. And if we can refer people to that, say, you want to know what your road is, here's how you can search it down and find it out for yourself. If you're going to do that research, then the more you get working on it, the cheaper it'll be per person.
Duly noted. So, I think we probably have enough direction to put together a draft report in 1 week. And get that out to everybody to take a look at. And your comments and responses will certainly be very valuable in helping us get a final product together. But the idea is that the next meeting you would adopt a final report and then send that off to the legislature for February 1st is necessarily going to be scalable. Yeah. It's right. It's a progress report. We just got started. We thank you for all the money we didn't get for notice, and we did our best.
How did they dare expect anything?
I don't know. Someone called and all these committees going, and then get the shrine and normally there's committees that need to be full session. This one is ongoing.
They made it an ongoing one because they know that it's too big a problem. They're trying to solve it because of football and that kind of stuff.
It's just getting speed bumps. So, as far as forming subcommittees, probably premature until we get some direction from the legislature as to where they want to go and how.
So, Jim, next meeting was in 2 weeks on the 25th, right?
Correct.
Do we need or want to set something for February?
Well, we're going to submit that report to the legislature for February 1st.
Right.
I think we'll probably have earned a little bit of a break for a bit, unless others feel otherwise. But there may be some legislation that comes up this session that the legislature wants this commission to look at.
yeah, they want a presentation to the state representative for them.
Couple things could
Some
happen.
happenings before we necessarily need to convene.
And we have a limited number of meetings per year anyway. 6 for you of our wishes.
But we can use subcommittees in between.
Oh yeah, we can. And I think the question is what do we want to do with subcommittees? And right now I think we're set at such a high level that we're not quite
I
there.
think we should do the report and get some direction back from the legislature.
See what they'd like us to do.
Jim, you see this as a 1 to 2 page report, or 15, right?
Oh, not 15.
No.
Not a bad part of it. I think that.
Well, it's going to be a
exactly.
an addendum.
Exactly. It'll be everybody.
It will be the phone book, and the report will be brief.
Exactly.
I mean, it can include whatever we'd like it to be, and
I think they should see everything we've had to see.
I think that's right. I think
Not read it though. Well,
I don't think we should expect them to read it. I think we can say this is the most clear distillation of the very most high level
Sorry, which committee is it? I forgot.
state local stuff.
They hear it's on this website. They saw, for example, we don't have,
Oh, we can't find
there's materials that Roberta had prepared. It was a briefing that I put together. There's the MDOT tool, and then there were the written comments that were submitted. So right there's a sizable amount, and their minutes. Those are all minutes that reflect what we've taken in for input.
Our priority compilation is 22 pages. 21 pages. I don't know that we'll share that necessarily, but
It helps guide where we're going.
yeah.
Is there any reason why I should not post any of this stuff on the Maine ROADWays Facebook page?
Yeah, these are all records. You're welcome to post. The only thing I'd ask is if they're only at the draft minute stage, if we maybe hold off until we adopt the minutes, so once we've adopted them, I mean, they're so legal, but just like that, the finished product out there, that's all. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Anything else for today?
There's a comment in my
The chat?
Yeah, the chat, can't really be used unless it's public hearing. I don't think we can use that specifically as the record, but I have been sort of following it, and I don't see anything in the chat that wasn't echoed by someone in this room. And if we want to, the people who are listening out in the virtual hearing room want to send emails to the info@mainabandonroadsubmission. That's not what it is. Hold on 1 second. If you want to email it formally, you can, but we have to everyone.
And one other minor thing, I've been referring to it as the Commission on Abandoned and Discontinued Roads. You've been referring to it as CDLC, and I'm thinking, yeah, well, that's how you get over the money. You have one,
And there's an O, but,
Well, it's the orange one. The orange one.
yeah.
Figure it out.
So it's info.abandonedroadscommission@maine.gov.
Is there a motion to adjourn?